My family background is that I was born in Wilmington, Delaware in 1934. My father's side of the family was Irish. They had been in this country since the 1850s. My mother's side of the family were both immigrants. My grandfather on my mother's side was from a little town outside of Italy, and he came as an adult to this country. And my grandmother was from a little town in Tipperary in Ireland, and she came as an adult. And they met in Philadelphia and married, and had 17 children. My mother was the second youngest of the 17. Only 10 of them live, but it was a very close and loving family. And because of that immigrant experience, I adapted very well to the Cuban immigrant experience. And I think that that's why we hit it off so well, and I'm so close to my family even to this day, both the ones in Wilmington and the Cuban family too. I spend a lot of time with them.
Start by saying.
As a child, my relationship with Ted was one of nurturing and loving and disciplining him when he was naughty. He was a very active and curious child, so it was a question of my running after him. I had to keep up with him because he was going in every direction at once. And as he became a teenager, we gave him a little more freedom. He was able to do a lot more, and he really didn't abuse that freedom most of the time. Fortunately, he didn't go through a terribly rebellious time when he was a teenager. A couple of weeks were kind of rough, but on the whole, he was a good kid. And as an adult, we are friends. He accepts my advice. Sometimes he doesn't accept my advice. Sometimes he asks for it. Sometimes he doesn't ask for it. But we're close friends, and I love him dearly.
And how often do you see the grandchildren?
Oh, I see them 2 or 3 times a week. Oh, I see the grandchildren 2 or 3 times a week, usually, unless they're out of town. The summer, they tend to go out of town.
I want to tell a story that I live in the same.
I see my grandchildren 2 or 3 times a week, normally, unless they're out of town. In the summer, they're out of town a lot, and so, of course, I miss them during that time. But they come up to see me, and I go to see them. So this is a mutually beneficial arrangement.
What are Ted and Heidi like together? Can you describe their relationship from the eyes of a mother?
From the eyes of a mother, I find that Heidi is a very good match for Ted. She's a person with her own goals and direction. She's not a needy person. And this I appreciate very much. She allows Ted to do his thing. She supports him. She loves him. But she has her own goals and is a person in her own right. And I admire that very much.
Did you support Ted attending Christian high schools, and why?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I supported Ted going to Christian high school because I wanted him to have the moral background that I felt that he needed as an adult. And I felt that his academic background was sufficient that it would carry him through anywhere. But he needed the emotional support of kids his own age, being an only child. And he also needed the moral support, and I felt that that was important. Well, I felt that Ted was always very talented and that he would have something special in his life. But I really had no conception of what the direction would be. Until he became a teenager, then he had more fixed ideas about what his future would be. And whatever he wanted to do, that was fine with me, as long as it was legal and moral. That was great.
Can you share a couple humorous stories from Ted as a child?
One of the funniest stories of Ted as a child was with his grandparents visiting us for Christmas, and they were asleep in the back bedroom, and Ted was young, and he wanted to open his Christmas presents, and we would not allow him to do so until they were up and, part of the family and watching it. So he got a glass of water, and he took it in the bedroom, and he took that glass of water and he poured it on his grandfather's face. His grandfather came out of that bed so fast. But he got up. Let me tell you, I don't know where he got the idea to pour the water on his grandfather, but he did, and it was efficacious. When he was a small child, his favorite sports team were the Cowboys, and he had a Cowboys wastebasket, a Cowboys sweater, a Cowboys hat, and he rooted for the Cowboys all the time. As he got older, he became an Astros fan and then a Rockets fan. So those were the 3 teams that he enjoyed the most. I think Ted handled the pressure very well. I think Ted handled the pressure of the financial hardships very well, because we took the time to explain to him what the circumstances were, what the amount of money we had was, and what we were able to allow for his education, and he adapted accordingly. I think it helped build his character in as much as he became more independent and was able to take care of himself. As he left the house at 17, he really was leaving the nest then, and he took a couple of jobs while he was at Princeton to help put himself through, and he has been independent ever since. I would like America to know that he is a principled, loving, generous, kind man, that he is a wonderful son, a wonderful husband, and a wonderful father, and I love him very much. I think Ted would appeal to all backgrounds, at least most backgrounds in the United States, because he bases his policies on bedrock principles of the Judeo-Christian background, and these are common throughout America. From these principles, then his policies develop, and then he just needs to explain to the nation what the policies are and how they flow from these bedrock principles. Ted was surrounded by girls and women as he was growing up. He was the only boy in the family. He had two stepsisters who were 8 and 9 years older than he. He had two cousins from my sister who were 9 and 10 years older and were active in his life. And then, of course, Bibi was like a sister to him, and she was 5 years older.
Do that again, except...
It's about the women.
Women in his life.
Okay. Ted was surrounded by women in his life. He was the only young male in the family. He had two half-sisters who were 8 and 9 years older than he. He had two cousins who were the daughters of my sister, who were 9 and 10 years older and were involved with him. And then, of course, Bibi, who was 5 years older, who was very much involved in his life. My sister was also, but to a lesser degree.
Tell me your feelings on the day Ted was sworn in as U.S. Senator from Texas.
Oh, when Ted was sworn in as senator from Texas, I was so proud of him. I was just bursting at the seams, and I found it almost surreal that he had reached that particular status. It was such a wonderful thing. He had worked so hard, and the doors just opened, and he walked right through them. And it was the grace of God that put him in that position, I'm convinced. If Ted becomes president of the United States, I think that the world can rely on his word. He says what he means, and he does what he says. And I think that ultimate statement of his beliefs are strong enough that it would permeate the world, and people would know where America stands. And his policies will fall from that. When I was growing up, at least until the time that I was 13, I spent a lot of time with my mother's family in particular. It was very close, and like most immigrant families, they lived close to one another. When I was growing up, I spent a lot of time with my mother's family, my aunts and my uncles and my cousins. They all lived close together. And every weekend, we lived in the suburbs. Every weekend we would go to what was called Down Home, which was 2nd and Jackson in Wilmington, Delaware. At 2nd and Jackson, most of my aunts and uncles lived there, and we would make the rounds. We would go from my Aunt Clara's house to my Aunt Madeleine's, to my Uncle George's house, to my Aunt Martha's house, to my Aunt Mamie's house, to my Uncle Al's house, and the children were always welcome. We walked in, and they treated the children as though they were their own. They gave us something to eat, they gave us money, they gave us love, and it was a wonderful, warm family that supported each other wholeheartedly. And this formed my idea of what a family should be like from a very early age. My immediate family, my father in particular, came from a family of upper middle class. They were entrepreneurs. They had businesses that they ran. My mother's family, on the other hand, was an immigrant family. Okay. My mother and father grew, became adults during the Depression, and their idea of success was to always have a job. My father thought that a woman's place was in the home, and that she should get married and have children, and that was the way it was. Well, I didn't feel that way, and my mother supported me very much in getting a college education. So I insisted all through high school that I was going to go to college. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was going to do it. And my father was very much against it and said, "No, you're not going to." So we battled all during high school. And when my father was transferred to Houston, as I graduated from college, I moved there, and Rice University. When my father was transferred to Houston, I was just graduating from high school. At the time, I didn't know where I was going to college. All I knew was that I was going to college. I didn't know what it would take, but I was determined to do so. It so happened that Rice University was 2 miles down the street from where we lived. So I went there and put in my application, and 2 weeks later, my application was accepted. Now, Rice was a unique place at the time because they didn't charge tuition. Everybody there was on scholarship. It was all valedictorians and high-achieving students from large high schools. The fact that I came from a small high school was surprising, that I was accepted. But I was, and therefore my father allowed me to go to Rice, and I graduated from Rice. As a result of having not to pay tuition, just to go there and live at home, he felt it was okay for me to do that. And when he went to work, people were very pleased that his daughter had been accepted at Rice. So I got my degree in mathematics and went on from there. After I graduated from college, I got a job at Shell Research Lab in Houston as a computer programmer. At the time, there were no classes in programming. My degree was in theoretical mathematics. So all of my job training was on-the-job training. And I was fortunate enough to have a couple of men in the department who took me under their wing and taught me how to program, and were mentors to me, spent a lot of time teaching me. And this stood me in great stead for the rest of my career as a programmer. Punch cards were the input to the computer. They had what was called key punch machines. So you had to, it was basically like a keyboard, and you punched holes in the paper cards. Well, I didn't know how to type, and I didn't want to learn how to type because I didn't want somebody asking me to type letters for them. I wanted to be treated as a professional. So I just refused to learn how to type. And we always had someone else who would do the key punching and who would do the typing. So if someone asked me to type a letter, I'd say, "I'm sorry, I can't type a letter. I don't know how to type. You'll have to get someone else to do it. A secretary." I'm not a secretary, I'm a programmer. When I started off in programming, it was fairly unusual for a woman to have a degree in math and then to go into programming. But I was fortunate in the men who were my bosses because they did not treat me in a subservient way at all. They accepted me and they trained me. Shell at the time would not allow women to travel. So in order for me to travel as representative of our computing department, my boss would just put down my first initial and my last name and apply for funds, and then he would send me off to give a paper in Endicott, New York at the IBM conference, or he would send me off to Tulsa to teach a course in programming over there. And this is the way I got to travel, because he just pretended that I was a man. Now, this caused a little bit of kerfuffle when I went to Endicott, New York to present this paper, because it was a conference center and they had me rooming with a man. So when I walked up there, they went, "Ooh, we've got a problem here. We've got to change this situation." So they had to hustle around and find me a room by myself. Well, that was a very painful time. You should have set it up. Yeah, okay. When Ted's dad left us in Canada, it was a very painful time for me. I was very angry and I was very hurt. But I continued working at the company that we had founded and put Ted in daycare and had a nanny that would come in and stay with him. It was just a difficult time. It didn't last that long, but it was very painful, and I was glad when it was over. And I was very determined to have Ted have a father. To me, that was important. I didn't want to be a single mother. I felt that his having a father was the most important goal in my life, and fortunately, it was met. Well, at the time that Raphael was drinking, I was drinking too. So we were codependent. I was aiding and abetting in his drinking, and he was aiding and abetting in my drinking. So we were not in a good place at that time. So it was a blessing when he became a Christian and stopped the drinking and no longer supported me in my vice. When Ted was 3, Raphael left and went to Houston. The business was very shaky at the time because the government had interfered in the oil and gas business. So Raphael went to Houston to drum up business and started working there. This left Ted and myself alone in Calgary. And this was a time when it was difficult for a single mother to put a child in daycare. There was not a big support system. So it was difficult for me. And I had been getting a much lesser salary just because of tax purposes, and I had to get my salary increased. And I had to deal with the new people that were at the company. There were political aspects of the company because other people wanted to take it over. So I was fighting the problems of being a single mother and also being stabbed in the back at the office. So it was a very unhappy time for me. When Raphael became a Christian, I was very pleased that he had, and I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know whether it really would change him in a way that would allow us to have a sound marriage. I was skeptical. So I was on edge most of the time when he came, just waiting for him to fail, waiting for him to do something wrong, because I didn't really believe that he had changed. But it was important enough for me, for Ted to have a father, that I was willing to go along with it to see if we could not make a go of it. And it was a full 3 years after we moved to Houston that I hit bottom emotionally and was able to accept the Lord myself, and that changed my life radically. That stopped my drinking, that stopped all kinds of things going on. It was a complete change in my personality and my life, and I'm eternally grateful for that. When you build a small business, or when you build any business, I guess, but when you start off in a small business, you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to be able to do everything because you never know when somebody is going to get sick, fall by the wayside. You're going to have incomplete health. So you need to know all aspects of the business. And it also means that you're working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's a very strenuous way to live. And we used to take you to work a lot. And you would run up and down the halls and play at the office. When the oil business crashed in the 1980s, in the mid-1980s, this had a devastating effect on our business because the business dried up completely. We had been dealing with small companies, and they no longer were doing any oil exploration, so the business shut down. We had 25 employees and no business coming in. And there really wasn't very much that we could do about it. It was just, the Saudis were pumping oil like crazy and driving the price of oil down below $10 a barrel, and it was no longer economical to do what we had been doing, and we had to shut down the business. Now, for me, it was not as devastating as it was for Raphael because my identity was not involved in the business. My identity was more as a wife and a mother than it was as a business owner. And I felt that we could start over again. And we just had to put up with it and tighten the belt and go take a a lesser paying job and start all over again.
Talk about losing.
Well, at the time that the oil business crashed, jobs were very scarce. It used to be that Houston was inundated by people coming in from Michigan, coming in from all over the country. Well, when the oil business crashed, they were renting the U-Hauls and they were going out again, and there were no jobs available. And at that time, I was getting older, and as an elder person, they were not particularly interested in hiring me. When they found out what my experience was, they really didn't want to hire me because they felt that they had to pay me too much and they wanted a younger person to do the job. So in order to get a job, I had to dumb down my resume. I had to take off most of the experience that I had and just say that I had been a housewife and that I was getting back into the business world, and this was I had had some experience as a computer programmer, and that I had a degree in math, and that was all that I put on there. But I didn't put the various jobs that I had. I didn't talk about the development of the systems that I had done or the installation of the systems that I had done for various clients. I just made it a very simple thing in order to get hired. Well, because when Ted was in high school, that's when the oil business crashed. We had taken a lot of our money and had invested it in real estate. Well, because the oil business crashed and Houston was a one-business town at the time, the real estate business crashed too. We owned our office building, we owned various investment properties, and we were no longer able to service the debt for them. Eventually, we had to sell our house.
Let me stop you.
Well, that's not quite the way it happened. We didn't declare bankruptcy and lose our home. We sold our home.
Just tell the story, but don't give all the macroeconomic justification.
We did declare bankruptcy.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
That was after the house was sold.
But
When the money dried up in the oil business, we were forced to sell our home. We put it on the market, and someone did buy it for the amount that was owed on it, plus the amount of money that we owed the IRS. At the time that we sold the home, I was ready to move out because I was tired of worrying about paying bills. I wanted to move into a smaller place. So emotionally, I moved out long before we sold the home. Once we sold the home, moved into a rental place, then we had to declare bankruptcy. The reason being that the bank had foreclosed on our office building, and there was a deficiency that was owed to the bank, and according to the IRS, that was going to be treated as income for us. So the only way we had to declare bankruptcy to wipe that debt off the books, otherwise we would have had to pay income tax on the deficiency that was there. And that's the real reason that we declared bankruptcy, because of the office building. The rest of our bills were not that great, but the office building deficiency was and the IRS position was the main reason, and we just had to do it because there was no way that we could come up with a $160,000 deficiency payment. When the price of oil dropped, we had to shut down our business. We were forced to sell our home, and we had to declare bankruptcy. So this was a very difficult emotional and economic time for us. As a result of the collapse of our business, we had no financial resources whatsoever because all of the resources that we had went towards paying our debts. So when Ted started Princeton, he was stuck with having to pay for it himself. When Ted started Princeton, he had to provide for loans and scholarships for himself because we did not have any resources to provide for him. So he took 2 jobs in order to help pay for his daily expenses there. And we could give him love and kisses, but that's about it. He was stuck with having to pay the rest of it himself. And he did that very well. He got a couple of good jobs and took care of it, and took out a lot of student loans, which he ended up taking quite a few years to pay off, but fortunately he was able to pay them off. When Ted first started working, he was working in D.C. at the time, and he came back to Houston for a visit. It was in September. My birthday is in November. We were going to drive to Dallas to visit Tia Sonia and the crew up there. And Ted tended to be late a lot of times, so he left me sitting at home waiting for him to come so that we could drive to Dallas. This went on for hour after hour, and I called Sonia and I said, he's not here yet. I don't know when we're coming. We'll just be there when we get there. So he arrived back at the house, and he came in, and I was like this. And I said, I think you owe me an apology. And he said, Mom, come outside. And so he took me by the hand. I went outside to the driveway, and here was this beautiful red Saab convertible sitting in the driveway. I said, Ted, did you buy a new car? He had just bought a Mercedes little convertible. And he said, Mom, that's your birthday present. And I went, oh my gosh. And I ran in, called Sonia on the phone, and I said, all is forgiven. We're leaving right now. We're coming to Dallas. I'll tell you about it when we get there. And I called my sister and I said, we're going to stop by. I want to show you something. Don't go to bed. Whatever you do, don't go to bed. So we drove over to my sister's house, and my sister and brother-in-law came out and saw the car. And I was so excited. And Ted was so tired that he made me drive. And I was driving this brand new car that I didn't know anything about up to Dallas, and drove all the way up there. And we got to Dallas about 2 in the morning and told Sonia, come out and see what's here. And she jumped. She was in her night clothes. She came out and jumped in the car and took a ride in it. Everybody was excited over the car. I couldn't believe it. His generosity, and it wasn't even my birthday yet, but that was a wonderful birthday present, a very generous one. When Ted was a young lawyer, he came home from D.C. one weekend and surprised me with a new car, a red convertible. He knew how much I loved convertibles. And it was a birthday present. My birthday was in November, and he did it in September, so it was a complete surprise.
You want to do it together, scene real quick?
Yep.
And then let's move on. A lot of great stuff. Good job.
You got to train me. I'm sorry.
No, you're doing great. You're very natural on TV. My whole life, my dad's been a hero to me. My whole life, my mom's been a best friend. She has been an incredible, loving mom who for every day of my life gave me unconditional love and support. I always knew I could count on my mom. I'll tell you, she's an amazing grandmother to Caroline and Catherine. You have never seen a more doting, loving grandmother. The girls call her Mimi. And you should see when 2 little girls do cannonballs landing into her lap. I admire my mother. I've been blessed to have grown up surrounded by strong women. My mom was raised in an Irish-Italian working-class family. And she became the first person in her family ever to go to college. She went to Rice, graduated in 1956 with a math degree. That was an era where there were not a whole lot of women doing that. And I'll tell you, my grandfather, my mother's father, was not an easy man. He drank far too much, and he didn't think women should get an education. And he and my mother battled. My mother is quiet and soft-spoken, but she has a will of steel. And she battled her dad that she was going to go to college. And then she went to work in 1956 at Shell as a computer programmer. Now, you don't have to be a devotee of Mad Men to realize what the working environment was like for professional women in the computer industry and the oil and gas industry, and she was at the intersection of both. She's a strong-willed woman. You know, it's interesting as I think in my own life, my wife Heidi had a similar battle with her father. Her relationship with her father does not have the same challenges that my grandfather had. But just like my mom, Heidi had to battle her dad to go to the college she wanted to go to. Heidi and my mom have a lot of similarities. They're loving, compassionate people, but they're strong-willed women. Strong-willed women who stood up to tough fathers and forged their own way. I'm just thinking for a second.
Are we rolling or not?
Yeah, we're still rolling.
Okay. Eleanor, why don't you say something to get him going?
Well, Ted gives me credit for a lot more than I give myself credit for. I just walked into these places and I did these things without thinking that they were unusual or special. And he keeps telling me how special they were, and I'm like, really? I just walked in and did it and didn't expect to do anything differently. And fortunately, things went my way on that. So I'm surprised when he treats it as something special.
You know, my mother grew up in a family of what I guess today would be called Reagan Democrats. Irish and Italian, Catholic, working class family. But a family that loved each other,
Very much.
that had strong passions, had a strong work ethic, and believed in America. And my mother's journey has been a remarkable one. She went on to be the first person in her family ever to go to college. Within a few years out of college, she was working at the Smithsonian, helping calculate the orbits for Sputnik, the Russian satellite going around the Earth. That was a pretty heady place for an Irish-Italian girl out of Wilmington, Delaware.
Working at MIT.
I'll tell you, my mother is an incredible prayer warrior. This has been a remarkable journey, but one of the things that gives me real strength is not a day goes by that my mom is not lifting me up in prayer
That's right.
for hours at a time. When I was campaigning for the Senate, my mother would volunteer. Now, my mom is very different from my dad. My father is not shy. He is a preacher, and he will speak his mind. My mother is much more soft-spoken, but she wanted to help out. She wanted to volunteer, and so she would phone bank. She would call people and urge them to come out and vote for her son, but she was too shy to say that she was my mom. So she would just call people and say, I'm a volunteer calling for Ted Cruz to urge you to come vote. And she wouldn't tell anyone she was my mom.
Occasionally I did. When they got euphoric over him, I said, oh, I'm so glad you like him so much because he's my son and I love him.
I love you, Mom.
Love you too, dear. I'm proud of you.
One more hug.
I love
Right
you,
arm.
Mom.
Here we go. And hold for a second.